Wildlife biologists are extremely important to preserving the current state of our environment and deepening our understanding of the other creatures that share the planet with us. Zoologists and wildlife biologists perform experiments to either increase our knowledge about a certain species or see how humans influence the ecosystem in question. Although the roles and abilities of zoologists and wildlife biologists often overlap, zoologists typically conduct scientific investigations and basic research on particular types of animals such as birds or amphibians. Wildlife biologists are more likely to study specific ecosystems or animal populations such as particular at-risk species. Wildlife biologists also do applied work such as the conservation and management of wildlife populations. A more noticeable contribution of zoologists and wildlife biologists is their research on ways to encourage abundant game animal populations to support recreational hunting and tourism. Today, many also work with public officials in conservation efforts to protect species from threats and help animal populations return to and remain at sustainable levels. One of the tests or experiments that they perform is taking blood from animals to assess nutrition levels, check animals for disease and parasites, and tag animals in order to track them. Zoologists and wildlife biologists use various forms of technology to estimate wildlife populations, track the movements of animals, forecast the spread of invasive species or diseases, project changes in the availability of habitat, and assess other potential threats to wildlife. Zoologists and wildlife biologists also try to improve breeding programs that support healthy game animals, endangered populations, or other wild populations of land or aquatic life. Most zoologists and wildlife biologists work on research teams with other scientists and technicians. For example, zoologists and wildlife biologists may work with environmental scientists and hydrologists to monitor water pollution and its effect on fish populations. Fieldwork can require zoologists and wildlife biologists to travel to remote locations anywhere in the world. Depending on their job and interests, they may spend considerable time in the field gathering data and studying animals in their natural habitats. For example, cetologists studying whale populations may spend months at sea on a research ship. Other zoologists and wildlife biologists may spend significant amounts of time in deserts or remote mountainous and woodland regions. Other zoologists and wildlife biologists may spend very little time in the field. Although the ability to travel is often viewed as a benefit, few modern amenities may be available to those who travel in remote areas. Zoologists and wildlife biologists work in both warm and cold climates and in all types of weather. For example, ornithologists who study penguins in Antarctica may need to spend significant amounts of time in cold weather and on ships, which may cause seasickness. Some zoologists and wildlife biologists handle wild animals or spend significant amounts of time in outdoors in difficult terrain or inclement weather. Zoologists and wildlife biologists may work long or irregular hours, especially when doing field work. Zoologists and wildlife biologists who work with nocturnal animals may also need to work at night at least some of the time. Zoologists and wildlife biologists typically need a bachelor's degree for entry-level positions. Botany, chemistry, and physics are important because zoologists and wildlife biologists must have a well-rounded scientific background. Given that zoologists and wildlife biologists must be able to do complex data analysis, math, and statistics are also important. A bachelor's degree is often required because the field requires intimate knowledge of many biological processes as well as anatomy and ecological systems. Entry-level positions usually involve performing scientific tests such as drawing blood, assessing nutrition levels, checking animals for disease and parasites, and tagging animals. Wildlife biology programs may focus on applied techniques in habitat analysis and conservation. You should also obtain an undergraduate degree in wildlife biology, general biology, zoology, ecology, or another related field. Getting a wildlife biology master's degree or PhD will be required to advance beyond entry-level positions. You will be able to engage in the research aspect of the job, such as improving breeding programs, projecting threats to wildlife, and developing conservation plans. Lastly, a PhD allows you to obtain the most funding for independent and university research positions. Typically, you will have to obtain this funding all on your own. Communication skills are important for writing scientific papers, giving talks to the public, policymakers, and academics. Critical thinking skills are essential because zoologists and wildlife biologists need sound reasoning and judgment to draw conclusions from experimental results and scientific observations. Emotional stamina and stability are needed because zoologists and wildlife biologists may need to endure long periods with little human contact or work with injured or sick animals. Interpersonal skills are needed because in this career you will typically work on teams and need to be able to work effectively with others to achieve goals or negotiate conflicting goals. Observational skills are needed as wildlife biologists and zoologists need to notice slight changes in animal behavior and appearance. Outdoor skills are useful as you may need to chop wood, swim in cold water, navigate terrain in poor weather conditions, and carry heavy equipment across long distances. Problem-solving skills are important as you will need to find the best possible solutions to threats against wildlife. In addition, high-level wildlife biology researchers should develop a working knowledge of computers that will be used to enhance the research process. Many wildlife biologists will eventually specialize into a particular area of study defined by either an ecosystem, species, or the aspect of zoology or wildlife biology they study. Entomology, for example, is a study of insects. Limnology is a study of biological, chemical, and physical aspects of fresh water. Cetologists study marine animals such as dolphins and whales. Histologists study the microscopic anatomy such as cells and tissues in plants and animals. Soil zoologists study the animals which live fully or partially in the soil. Ethology is a particularly interesting one where they study behavioral ecology such as animal behaviors and natural or adaptive traits. Lastly, teratology is a study of abnormal physiological development. According to the BLS, the median annual wage for zoologists and wildlife biologists as of May 2018 was $63,420. The lowest 10% earned around $40,290, while the highest 10% earned more than $102,000. Employment of zoologists and wildlife biologists is projected to grow 5% from 2018 to 2028, which is about as fast as the average for all occupations. More zoologists and wildlife biologists will be needed to study human and wildlife interactions as the human population grows and development impacts wildlife in their natural habitats. Changes in climate patterns can be detrimental to the migration habits of animals, and increased sea levels can destroy wetlands. Therefore, zoologists and wildlife biologists will be needed to research, develop, and carry out wildlife management and conservation plans that combat these threats and protect our natural resources. However, because most funding comes from governmental agencies, demand for zoologists and wildlife biologists will be limited by budgetary constraints. Zoologists and wildlife biologists may face strong competition when looking for employment. Applicants with practical experience gained through internships, summer jobs, or volunteer work done before or shortly after graduation should have better chances at finding employment. This graph demonstrates the employment opportunities by state in the United States as according to BLS.gov. The lightest green states represent 40 to 100 zoologists and wildlife biologists that are employed. The brown to green states represent 130 to 210 zoologists and wildlife biologists that are employed. The dark green states represent 220 to 350 zoologists and wildlife biologists that are employed. And the darkest green states represent 360 to 2,370 zoologists and wildlife biologists that are employed. This slide illustrates the mean annual wage of zoologists and wildlife biologists by state in the U.S. as according to BLS.gov. The lightest blue states represent a mean wage of $48,330 to $59,110. The light blue states represent a mean wage of $59,190 to $65,220. Medium blue states represent a mean wage of $65,550 to $69,430. Lastly, the dark blue states represent a mean wage of $69,890 to $109,420. Many people with a zoology and wildlife biology background become high school teachers or college or university professors. There are also many opportunities for work at places such as zoos, wildlife parks, and even in research labs. Perhaps you don't want to work in a zoo. Other jobs such as veterinary technicians for exotic animals exist, along with the possibility of becoming an environmental consultant.